Disclaimer. The following video contains content related to real-life violence, transphobia, and the murder of a minor. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This documentary is based entirely on verified public records, trial transcripts, and victim advocacy sources. The purpose of this video is to educate, preserve Gwen Araujo's memory, and shed light on the violence faced by transgender individuals. What does it mean to be yourself when your truth could cost you your life? In 2002, a teenager named Gwen Araujo was tortured and killed by a group of young men, not because of anything she did, but because of who she was. Her story became one of the most heartbreaking, enraging, and unforgettable true crimes in recent memory. It was a case that shook America, not just because of the brutality, but because of the courtroom excuse that followed, the infamous panic defense. Today, we walk you through the life, the murder, and the fight for justice for Gwen Araujo, a story that still echoes through every transgender person's daily reality. Gwen was born Edward Araujo Jr. on February 24, 1985, in Brawley, California. She was the second child of Sylvia Guerrero and Edward Araujo Sr. Her parents separated early in her life, and she was raised primarily by her mother. Growing up in Newark, a small working-class town in the San Francisco Bay Area, Gwen's early childhood was marked by confusion, bullying, and attempts to fit into a world that seemed unwilling to accept her. Even as a child, Gwen gravitated toward dolls, dresses, and feminine behavior. By the time she entered middle school, she had already begun questioning her identity. Her mother, Sylvia, noticed Gwen would sneak into her makeup drawer. She'd try on her clothes, wrap a towel around her head like long hair, and dance in front of the mirror. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't play. It was Gwen expressing herself in the only way she knew how. At school, Edward was bullied mercilessly. Teachers would later recall moments where Gwen, then still using her birth name, would cry after being called slurs or shoved in the hallway. Her siblings were fiercely protective, but there was only so much they could do. The world didn't understand Gwen. And as she grew older, the gap between how she felt and how she was treated became unbearable. In her early teens, Edward made a decision that would change everything. She began living full-time as a girl. She chose the name Gwen, inspired by pop star Gwen Stefani. She began presenting as female in public, dressing in women's clothes, wearing makeup, and insisting people refer to her by her chosen name and pronouns. The transition wasn't easy. It came with mockery, threats, and exclusion. But Gwen was brave. She was loud, proud, and determined not to live a lie. Her mother, at first, struggled. Sylvia admitted later that she didn't fully understand transgender identity, but she loved her child deeply. And after seeing Gwen's joy when, called by her chosen name, she embraced her daughter completely. Gwen's world was small, but she made it hers. She had close friends. She loved singing, fashion, and dancing. She even dreamed of being a model or a makeup artist. She hung out at the local community center and at house parties with older teens, trying to live like any other teenager. But there was a danger lurking in Gwen's openness, a danger that even she didn't fully understand. It was during this time, around age 16, that Gwen began hanging out with a group of older boys. Michael Magidson, Jose Merrill, Jaron Neighbors, and Jason Cazares. All in their early 20s, they were part of a rougher crowd in Newark, blue-collar guys who drank, partied, and held very traditional macho values. Gwen had been invited to several parties where these guys hung out. At one such party, she reportedly had a sexual encounter with one of the men, possibly Jose or Michael. The details are hazy, but most agree Gwen didn't disclose that she was transgender. Some say she was afraid. Others believe she felt no obligation. But whatever the reason, this secret would soon explode. Whispers started among the group. "She's different," someone said. She's not what she seems. At one party, a girl who had known Gwen longer confronted the boys and suggested Gwen might be a guy. Tension began to rise. There was talk, jokes, then threats. What happened next would turn suspicion into savagery. October 3rd, 2002. Newark, California. It started like any other house party. Loud music, cheap liquor, young men showing off in front of each other. Gwen was invited to a gathering at Jose Merrill's house. She had been there before. She'd laughed in that living room, danced in that garage, and maybe even kissed one of the boys who now eyed her with suspicion. But this night wasn't just about partying. Behind the smiles and the drinks, a plan was forming. The guys were talking, whispering, accusing, joking in that cruel way men sometimes do when insecurity meets ignorance. The rumor about Gwen had taken root. They wanted to know the truth. As the party wore on into the night, Nicole Brown, Jose's girlfriend, began directly confronting Gwen. Some accounts say Gwen seemed nervous. Others say she stood her ground. But tension filled the room. Then came the horrifying moment. The boys forcibly grabbed Gwen and dragged her into the bathroom. There, they pulled down her pants, an act of brutal humiliation and non-consensual exposure. What they saw confirmed their suspicions. Gwen was transgender, and in that moment, everything snapped. Fueled by rage, booze, and toxic masculinity, Michael Magidson, Jose Morel, and Jaron Nabors descended into an uncontrollable fury. Gwen tried to leave, but they wouldn't let her. First, it was slurs. You lied to us. You tricked us. You're not even a girl. Then, the beatings began. One witness, Emmanuel Morel, Jose's younger brother, would later testify that Gwen was punched, repeatedly. He saw someone strike her with a can of food. Someone else used a frying pan. The assault moved to the garage. There, Gwen, already battered and bleeding, was tied up with rope. Her mouth was gagged. Her wrists were bound. Her skull was fractured. She begged them to stop. One of the attackers reportedly kneed her in the head while she lay on the garage floor, limp and unconscious. The boys paused, unsure what to do. Gwen was barely alive, or maybe already gone. But instead of calling 911 or showing a shred of remorse, they chose silence, a fatal silence. They wrapped her in a blanket. They stuffed her into the back of a pickup truck, and they drove. The drive lasted nearly 3 hours. Through the darkness, over winding roads, past the point of no return, they reached a remote wooded area in El Dorado County near the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly 150 miles from Newark. There, beneath a canopy of pine trees, Gwen's killers dug a shallow grave. No one knows for certain whether Gwen was still alive in that moment. But she was dumped into the ground like garbage. They buried her beneath dirt and rocks, covered the site with leaves, and drove away, leaving behind a 17-year-old girl whose only crime was existing as herself. Back in Newark, Sylvia Guerrero was frantic. Gwen hadn't come home. Her phone was off. No calls, no messages. She filed a missing persons report, but was told to wait. Maybe Gwen just ran away again, but Sylvia knew. She could feel it. Her daughter wasn't coming back. 2 weeks passed, then, out of nowhere, a confession. It wasn't a tip from police. It wasn't a breakthrough in forensics. It was guilt. Just days after Gwen's murder, Jaron Nabors, one of the 4 involved, began to unravel. He had left town and traveled to Lake Tahoe, likely trying to escape what he had done. But the weight of it all was too much. One night, he confessed everything to a friend. We killed someone, a girl, Gwen. That friend went straight to police. On October 15, 2002, Jaron neighbors led detectives to a remote spot off the side of a logging road in El Dorado County. There, in a shallow grave, lay the body of Gwen Araujo, wrapped in a blanket, bound by rope. Decomposing for nearly 2 weeks. It didn't take long. The other three, Michael Magidson, Jose Morel, and Jason Cazares, were arrested. The community of Newark was stunned. These weren't strangers. These were local boys, blue-collar, everyday guys. One had been a semi-pro boxer, another was a father. But behind that mask of normalcy lay an ugliness far deeper than anyone expected. News spread like wildfire, and then came the outrage, not just about the murder, but what happened next. As the trial approached, Gwen's family hoped for justice. What they got was something else. The defense strategy? They claimed the boys were provoked, driven to rage and violence by the sudden discovery that Gwen was transgender. It was called the gay panic, or trans panic defense, and it was as horrific as it sounds. Lawyers argued that the men felt betrayed and tricked after having sexual encounters with Gwen. They claimed their violent reaction was understandable, yet even excusable. Because of that discovery, it was victim blaming at its worst. They turned Gwen into the aggressor. They painted her as a deceiver, as if she was the one who committed a crime. The prosecution, led by Alameda County Deputy District Attorney Chris Lamiero, fought back hard. He called Gwen's murder what it truly was, a hate crime, a premeditated killing based on gender identity, but the legal system was not on Gwen's side. In 2004, after a long emotional trial, 2 juries deadlocked on the question of first-degree murder. Eventually, Michael Magidson and Jose Merrill were convicted of second-degree murder. Jaron neighbors, who confessed and testified, took a plea deal and was sentenced to 11 years. Jason Cazares pled no contest to voluntary manslaughter and received 6 years. And here's the most heartbreaking part. No one was convicted of a hate crime. Despite the slurs, the motive, the violence, despite the fact that Gwen was targeted because she was transgender, the hate crime enhancement was rejected. Gwen's mother, Sylvia Guerrero, broke down in court. The justice system had let her daughter down, again. If the courts wouldn't give Gwen justice, Sylvia would fight for it herself. She became an advocate, a voice for trans kids, a voice for grieving families. She gave interviews. She met with lawmakers. She told Gwen's story at vigils, in schools, in legislative hearings, anywhere people would listen. And people listened. In 2006, California passed the Gwen Araujo Justice for Victims Act. This law made it harder for defendants to use the panic defense, preventing them from blaming the victim's gender or sexual orientation for their violent actions. Gwen's name was now written into law. A small piece of justice, a giant step forward. It's been over 2 decades since Gwen was taken from this world, but her story hasn't faded. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, a Lifetime movie titled A Girl Like Me, The Gwen. Araujo's story brought her life to television screens across America. Her name became a rallying cry, not just for transgender rights, but for truth, dignity, and the right to exist. Her name was Gwen Araujo. She was smart, she was bold, she was beautiful. She didn't deserve to die, and we will never forget her. If Gwen's story moved you, do not stay silent. Speak out against transphobia. Educate yourself and others. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that the world tried to bury. Like, comment, and share this video to help Gwen's story live on. And turn on notifications so you never miss the next archived truth, because in the end, every victim deserves a voice, and every truth must be told.